And it was a reminder for me that backpacking can be really hard, and just like based on the way that you feel physically and the effort that you're putting into it. And it was just surprising to me because sometimes I think the first day is kind of hard, but I forget that sometimes, your second day can be really hard too, especially with the elevation. And I started to doubt and question like, wow, is it going to feel easier at all on this trip? Or is it just going to be that every step I take, I just feel fatigued?
Hi, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Molly.
And you're listening to the
Two Sisters on Adventures podcast.
So we're already to the second day in the winds. You might recall that last week we were talking about how this day was going to be our jumping off point where we would leave the CDT and start the Alan Dixon route, the high route through the winds. So this day we knew we were going to need to get up really early because there was a chance of thunderstorms in the afternoon, and to get onto the Alan Dixon route, you basically have to start by going over Knapsack Col. Knapsack Col, I don't remember its exact elevation, but it's pretty high and it's known for being pretty exposed as well. It's just kind of you in a boulder field way above tree line. So it's not really a place that you want to get caught in a thunderstorm, especially per the meteorologists, because it'd be so embarrassing to be struck by lightning. In addition to other things.
Which bold move for us. I wrote that we set our alarm for 4:45 a.m. so we would have enough, we would give ourselves a chance to start early and then be able to get over the cold and then start heading down before the forecasted thunderstorms for that afternoon started to roll in.
I don't remember exactly how far we were from the high point of the Col, but it was going to be 100% uphill until you got to the Col. So
I want to say we were almost 8 miles from the point at which we would be descending. So maybe 7 miles from the Col, and it was going to be 4,000 feet of gain to get there. So we were definitely wanting to give ourselves time to ascend. Once again, considering that we had gone from basically close to sea level to we're, at 10,000 feet now.
Yeah, so I wrote in my journal that I had trouble sleeping that night, didn't really seem to fall asleep until after 2 a.m., which I can only assume was actually probably elevation related. It's kind of funny because in the moment I'm sure I was just frustrated or annoyed, but looking back on it, I'm like, oh yeah, we've had issues with sleeping at higher elevations in the past, so it would make sense that I would have it again.
And we crawled into our tent, and then of course we were pitched on kind of a slope, so then it's you're kind of rolling to your side a little bit, and it's kind of hard to actually relax when you're constantly fighting gravity's pull to drag you to one side of the tent. And then I want to say that after we'd been in the tent for maybe an hour, then it started to do that thing where the wind rushes down the side of the mountain, and it wasn't we were in a nice grove of trees, so it wasn't our tent was getting hit by wind, but then it just everything is kind of loud, and it's not the easiest to relax. We've never been one for earplugs. A lot of people do use earplugs at night when camping and backpacking, and maybe I have to give that a second thought. But yeah, it was not a good restful night of sleep, and we were planning to get up very early, well before dawn.
I just kind of feel weird about earplugs though, because I feel like it's important to pay attention to what's around you. I was woken up on the John Muir Trail because there was a bear in camp, and I don't know, but obviously people do it all the time, and probably you would sleep better, except I think I would probably be thinking about how annoyed I was to have an earplug in my ear. But if it made me sleep better, that would be nice. So there had been no rain all night, and I was feeling pretty optimistic that we were just going to bust out of our beds around 4:45.
Optimistic, we're capable of getting out of our beds.
Hey, we've done it before, and we have to. So I was feeling pretty optimistic, but then all of a sudden, our alarm went off at 4:45, and I think we kind of built in the fact that we would just lay in our beds until 5. Well, at exactly 5 a.m., it was the heavens had opened and released all their rain. There was really not a forecast for rain in the morning, so although of course mountain forecasts are going to be very specific to geographical regions and different microclimates and all that kind of stuff, I still wasn't expecting it. So we kind of had a little discussion, and it was well, it's basically already pouring rain, so it doesn't really make sense to get up and we're going to head for the coal in pouring rain, we could hear that our other campmate, who also was planning to go to Knapsack Coal, I think he was starting to wrestle around at 5, but as soon as it started raining so hard, there was no sound from him. So we kind of just decided we'll wait until the rain ends and then we'll decide what we're going to do.
And hard to really justify. I mean, some days you have to get out of your tent in the rain and get ready and hit the trail, but it's very difficult to justify, getting up well before sunrise when you don't really know how long the rain is going to last and what you're going to do. It's just not fun to think about getting out of your tent and then just everything getting wet.
Well, when the whole justification for getting up at 5 was because we were going to try to get over a certain point before it rains, it feels hard to say I need to get up at the same time so that I can go to that place while it's raining. It just felt like we may as well see what the weather panned out to be. So it rained basically until I think 8 or 8:15-ish a.m. And I'd say mostly pretty hard, although towards the end it kind of, was off and on. We got up about 8:30 and so did our campmate, as I call him, though we were camping in 2 different spots. And so we kind of discussed with him what he was going to do, and he said he was still going to go and just see what it was looking like towards Knapsack Coal. Of course, since he's a thru hiker, he was able to just throw all his stuff together and go pretty quick before us. But I thought it was interesting because it was like even a thru hiker wasn't going to get out of his bed at 5 in the morning when it's pouring rain. So obviously we did all of our camp chores in our very inefficient manner. And then I think we left around 9:45 or 10. Maybe it was 10:30, honestly. I don't know.
I wrote down 10:45.
I think that we just couldn't make up our mind if we were going to try to rush for the coal or what we were going to do. So we finally started, and as we headed uphill, it was kind of funny because we met some people who were headed downhill, and I feel like a lot of them were saying I was going to get up, but then I just stayed in my tent because it was rainy, and it was okay, so pretty much no one had motivation to go into the rain this morning.
I have a story about camp chores, though, before we even set out. So like Carrie mentioned, the day before we crossed over a couple dribbles of water, and then because we weren't going to filter from a glacial stream, one of us had to backtrack to actually go get the water. And so I just wore my camp shoes, my Tevas, and was barefoot because I was annoyed that everything was wet and I didn't want my socks to get wet. And as I was walking to, fill up our Canuck bag from the trickle, the trail was actually full of puddles, and I was great, here I'm wearing my shoes, no socks, puddles everywhere. I tried to straddle a puddle and I almost fell, and this is right when this group of rain gear clad kind of older hikers was rounding the corner. They were ready for anything, and here I am slipping around, and they're wow, you got to be careful, the mud is slippery. And I was thank you. And I was oh man, just watch me slip and injure myself on the second day of getting water. So I had a little bit of a mood in addition to everything else.
So we met a few groups of people as we headed up, and like I said, none of them we only heard from one person who had hiked in the rain that morning out of the several groups of people that we saw. But for the most part, people hadn't been interested in that. As we were kind of continuing on, I feel like Molly hadn't grabbed a ton of water that morning because of her mood that she was in. And
I wasn't going to go back and get more now.
And also the fact that we knew there was plenty of water up ahead. The winds, actually, they say there's usually water within every couple of miles. So we had said, we're only carrying one smart water bottle. So we did end up finding this kind of little clear trickle across the trail. And as we were filtering, we were passed for the first time by this pair of CDT hikers. And I just remember one of them had a Pringles can. And we were ooh, I wish I had a Pringles can that had Pringles in it. Yep. But we kept going because we were, trying to make good time. And then we came to this creek crossing that I had seen on Far Out. It said that it was very slippery. The rocks on it were just very slippery. And so I'm kind of thinking, okay, let's think about how we're going to cross this. But it was funny because as we came to it, we met up with those CDT hikers again. And they were kind of taking their time going through the winds because they were let's just enjoy a beautiful section. So there was Chimney Sweep and Shuey were their names. And Chimney Sweep... No, which one was Chimney Sweep? Yeah, Chimney Sweep was fly fishing, actually. So he was trying to catch them some breakfast, and Shuey was just enjoying some, Biscoff cookies while she watched him fish. So we visited with them for a little bit, and they said that they had been planning to go over Knapsack Col because it's supposed to be so beautiful, but they were like, yeah, let's look at the sky. It's not looking so hot, so we're not going to go over it. And we told them that more likely than not, we probably weren't going to go over Knapsack Col, but we were kind of going to leave that decision up till the last minute. So I spent a few minutes trying to figure out a crossing because it was so true. Every rock I stepped on, they didn't look mossy, but they were so slippery. And so I finally found a crossing, and I made it like 90% of the way across. And then, of course, my both feet slipped off the rock and I got wet up to my shins, which wasn't really a problem. But I always feel like when people are watching you, you want to make like the perfect crossing. So I told them, yeah, just be aware it actually is slippery.
We made it to the junction where if we wanted to continue with the high route, we would need to start really gaining elevation to make our way up to Knapsack Col and then head through that different route than the CDT. So this is where it would essentially break off, and then you would travel apart from the CDT for probably about 10 or 12 miles before you junction back up for a little bit and then kind of continue on your own route. So I don't even know if we initially, I don't know if, did we realize initially that we were actually on the Knapsack Col trail? No. So we there was a weird kind of like junction in the trail. And so we went left, and then all of a sudden, like the trail had been gaining gradually this entire time, but all of a sudden we were really heading up a steep trail, and we had to stop for a moment, and we pulled out our far out map and noticed that.
I think the thing that really indicated to us that we were on the wrong trail is I heard Shuey and Chimney Sweep on the trail below us, and I was like, hold up. But yeah, because literally the CDT actually was more poorly trod than the trail up Knapsack Col. And so I think that we didn't realize we were at the junction yet, and so we didn't even pull out our, map or anything to check, because we were like, obviously the way nicer trail is probably going to be the CDT because it sees more foot traffic. But I think a lot of people on the CDT do go over Knapsack Col. And so we had started heading up Knapsack Col. So then we kind of had this decision point, and it was a hard decision to make because if we wanted to take the Alan Dixon route, the first entry point, yes, you go over Knapsack Col and down into the Titcomb Basin, but then you go up from the Titcomb Basin to join the Dixon route. So if we didn't take Knapsack Col, that meant that we were going to have to basically go past Titcomb Basin on the CDT and then backtrack an extra like 4 or 5 miles and then try to jump back on the Dixon route above Titcomb Basin. So it adds on this extra mileage and also a little bit of extra elevation. And so it was like kind of the first spot where you're like, okay, well, if I don't do Knapsack Col, now we're already not really set up to jump right above Titcomb Basin tomorrow. And then where does that put us for the rest of the journey?
And so we sat down to just discuss it because we had, we'd only probably traveled up the trail like 400 feet, but we were going to have to decide what we wanted to do. And it was kind of a hard headspace because here in the last 3 days we had pivoted our plan so much from like the original high route and like the shuttle we'd already booked to staying an extra day and like booking a new shuttle and really being flexible in our plans and coming up with the idea to do the high route as well. That would give us more options to bail. And now here we were basically on the verge of bailing yet again to a plan that we had factored it in that we could do this other plan, this option C, you could say, I guess, but we were not hoping to do it. So it was kind of tough to just like sit there and once again, kind of death of a dream, say like, okay, I guess we can think about the high route down the road, but we're going to have to commit to the CDT for at least another day or two before we consider if we get on a high route again. And so it's like, on one hand, you really just want to push for it and just continue with the plan that you have in place because you've already given up on your first plan. But then we did look at the sky and it was like, well, we'd had pretty good blue skies, but I feel like we could kind of see off in the distance that there were some dark clouds building where we knew that we were going to have to give ourselves at least 4 hours, if not 5, to get over the col and like down to like a fairly safe elevation where we're not the highest thing around. And we just didn't feel confident in our ability to do that.
I also think it's hard because for me, I have a hard time assessing, am I just being a little baby scaredy cat or am I making a good decision? And I always assume that I'm just being a little baby scaredy cat. But when I look back on it, I'm like, oh, actually, why would you go over knapsack coal when the clouds are building that much? So it's kind of nice to have that validation in hindsight, where at the time it feels like, well, I already bailed on stuff because I was too nervous to do it. So am I just trying to bail on this one because I'm too nervous? But it's like, I actually think if the weather would have been fine, I would have had no qualms about going over Knapsack Pass, you know? And so it wasn't actually that my issue was with Knapsack Coal. It was that my issue was with the weather that might be coming in.
And so we then turned around and then backtracked, went back to junction with the CDT and continued on. And probably within 10 minutes of doing that, we saw like a couple behind us. And I think had stopped to just have a snack and then visited with them. And their original intention was also to do the high route. And it was really hilarious because I think they had used the same shuttle company as us and had arrived at the trailhead where we started within an hour or two of us on that first day. And so we were like, wow, if only we would have known, we would have shared a shuttle with you gladly. And so, you know, their intention was to do the high route, and they had also chosen that they were not going to go over the coal because of the weather. So it was kind of a nice encouragement to us, just knowing like, okay, we shouldn't base our decisions based on what other people are doing solely, but it's nice a little bit kind of some affirmation to say like, okay, we made a good decision. We're like, you know, there are other people who are also not going over this exposed pass with the potential for thunderstorms.
So even though we stopped to have a snack, we still knew that we had to keep a good pace because we could see that the clouds were definitely building behind us, and we were about to go over Green Lake Pass. And I think it was definitely over 10,000 feet. I don't remember its exact, altitude, but it was high and it was exposed. So we tried to keep a pretty good pace as we headed up. And one thing that was really kind of just felt unique about this pass is when you got to the top, I was kind of thinking it was going to be like the passes of the John Muir Trail, where sometimes you like get to the top and then it's straight up, okay, now we're going to descend. But this was like, you walked for probably at least a quarter or a half mile over just this green grassy pass where there were little lakes hidden here and there on the top of it, and it was just so beautiful and it just felt so unique. And even though there were people behind us and ahead of us, it also just felt really quiet and special. However, the clouds were really building at this point, so we started to try to head downhill as quick as we could.
Which ironically, so I'm just looking here, and yeah, so we hustled across the pass and we were at like 10,390 feet, and then we started to descend, and then we had to stop because we're just like, we haven't had lunch and we're hungry and we're like 7 miles into our day. And so the low point where we stopped, Carrie, was at 10,260 feet. So 130 feet below the pass, but still much lower than the highest thing around.
And we were actually back at either tree line or just an area that had trees, because the Green Lakes Pass, there was no trees anywhere. There were a couple rocks that maybe were as tall as I was, but we were definitely the tallest thing out there besides all the mountains around us, because we could see kind of the general area of Knapsack Coal. And let me tell you, that was a lot higher than us. And the clouds that were on it, I was feeling pretty good about not being inside of those. Ooh, anyway.
And so just talking about this area, so we were, ascending steadily the whole day. And when we got to this pass, we had climbed a good, probably, I'm realizing now, like a good 2,000 or more feet since when we set out from our camp. And being at, above 10,000 feet and just like this constant uphill trail, because we barely went downhill at all this day, I was really feeling tired. And my pack is fairly heavy because I have like 8 days of food in it, and I'd done backpacking and mountaineering, in the weeks leading up to this trip, but I just couldn't believe how tired I felt. And it was a reminder for me that backpacking can be really hard. And just like based on the way that you feel physically and the effort that you're putting into it. And it was just surprising to me because sometimes I think the first day is kind of hard, but I forget that sometimes, your second day can be really hard too, especially with the elevation. And I started to doubt and question like, wow, is it going to feel easier at all on this trip? Or is it just going to be that every step I take, I just feel fatigued? So the lunch break that we had was a welcome rest. And honestly, when we were crossing the pass and just the meadowy area, there were these beautiful streams trickling through. We saw the beautiful Indian paintbrush, and in the winds, there are a variety of colors, but they're this soft pastel pink color, which is beautiful and not something that we're as accustomed to seeing in the Pacific Northwest, where they're often more of a red color. So we just really enjoyed the flowers and the water and the green grass, while also maintaining a good zippy pace to try to get the heck out of that open area as the angry clouds were forming.
As we met the area where there started to be trees again, there was again a little creek for us to cross, and that was where we caught up with Chimney Sweep and Shuey. And whenever I'm with through hikers, I always assume that they're going to be going so fast that I'll see them once, as they catch up to me, and then I'll see the back of them, and never again will I meet them. But this was a fun day because we definitely got to leapfrog with them. They were having a little bit of a snack, so I think that kind of cemented our decision to have a snack right there. And so we ended up eating together. They were really kind of impressed by our trail pizzas. We were really impressed by, I don't even remember what they were eating, but everything they had looked so good. They hadn't caught any fish that morning, but we kind of just visited with them about their plans, and they were going to go to Pinedale, I think, in a couple days, so they were feeling pretty good about that. But as we were finishing up our little lunch with them, it started to sprinkle. So we thought, you know what? We got to get our stuff back in our packs, and we got to get ready to go.
So as the sprinkles began to fall, we packed up everything and we hit the trail and we went downhill for like maybe a quarter mile, and we thought we're going to cruise. And then all of a sudden it started to go back uphill again. But we maintained a good pace and we were able to get away from the rain. So we had to take our rain jackets off so we didn't overheat because we didn't need them. And then we just kept pushing the pace because we could see that basically behind us was the rainstorm. Like you could tell the kind of the blurred area that was dark where the sprinkles were, and then like Carrie mentioned, there was thunder as well. And so after about 2 miles of racing this thunderstorm, it finally caught up to us, and we could tell that the rain was much harder than those sprinkles we first started to outrun, and we were not going to actually fully escape this storm.
And I started to think about this theory of, I knew that there were going to be probably some pretty intense thunderstorms, but they typically don't last forever, right? And I started thinking as we were kind of hiking really fast, if it's going to be like really raining and maybe hailing, and we're not going to descend anytime soon, if anything, we're going to go more uphill. Do I want to just keep hiking as fast as I can through this really intense downpour? Or I was like, you know what, Molly, do you think that we should just set up our tent and just call this our sit break for the day, really? And so we popped up our tent, and I actually had packed my tent on top, I believe, that day, because I'd been thinking about it the last few days about how maybe we could choose to just sit inside our tent during thunderstorms. And so it was on top, so we were able to just get it out really fast. We found a spot that would not be ideal if you were going to camp there all night long, but it would be fine for probably, half hour, 1 hour of just sitting in it during the rain. And so we threw up our tent, and basically by the time that we had all the stakes in the ground and the rain fly was on, it was absolutely pouring. So we just kind of dived in and started hanging out. And that was one thing that I did regret, was having my pillow so far down. No, I had my pillow high up. You had yours far down. And so that was something where I was like, okay, I think for the rest of the winds, I'm leaving tent on top, pillow on top, so that at the very least I have something to sit on, because the ground got kind of cold. And honestly, we had a nice, half hour or so where it was just raining cats and dogs. But instead of sitting out there, walking along, trying to hide under a tree for a little bit of, respite from the wind and the rain and the hail, we were just inside our tent.
It was pretty nice, actually. And, we could hear the thunder roaring overhead. And I don't know if we had too much hail this time around, but don't worry. The winds would definitely get some more hail on us as time goes on. But yeah, it was I was like hoping that the storm would end, sooner than later, but it was nice to just be able to sit in the tent and be, you know, I wasn't dry, but I was not actively getting more wet either.
Yeah. So eventually the sun did come out again, which I was grateful for. But during our time in the tent, I did have, I had a Cliff Bar. I kind of sipped on some water. I can't remember if I had some electrolytes or something like that. If we had our bottles with us that had some water in it. So it was actually great because it doubled as, a little bit of time sheltering from the rain. And in addition to that, a little bit of time where we were resting and recouping and really not just having to feel stressed. So after all that, when the sun came back out, we just packed up our tent and figured, that'll dry out hopefully tonight or not because it might just be rainy. And we decided it was time to go. And I'm actually really grateful that we did that because this next area where we hiked and kind of journeyed was just mile for mile some of the most stunning territory that we encountered in the winds. And although I wish we would have gone over knapsack coal in some ways, I'm just so stunned and amazed by the lakes that we saw here. Molly and I felt like it reminded us almost of the enchantments in Washington, but obviously it's not as accessible as the enchantments or near to a big city. So there were so many less people there. So we kind of started leapfrogging again with Shuey and Chimney Sweep, and they asked us how the thunderstorm had been for us, and we said, oh, fine, we just sat in our tent. And they actually were like, I wish that we would have done that because they said it was raining so hard and it was so windy and so cold, and they were pretty miserable. But obviously it can go either way and you'll be fine.
And I think they sheltered a little bit higher than us too. So I'm sure that there was, I think it was more open. Basically from where we pitched our tent, once we packed it up and left, there were hardly any trees. We were just in a pretty open area. And the lake the biggest lake that we walked by was called Elbow Lake. And there was just like a smattering of small lakes and pools and ponds that we basically zigzagged through on the CDT. And we would, kind of do little rock hops, and you could see, I think that there were still some raindrops that were kind of in the air because they were making the little splashes on the water. But then you could also see where there were fish that were jumping as well. So I know that Chimney Sweep and Shuey, they took a couple breaks to just get some fishing in as well, which good for them. What a nice pace to just walk a bit and then fish a bit and continue on.
Mm-hmm. So we passed all these beautiful lakes, and I just feel like the lighting was really stunning with the granite. We saw a couple groups that were camping, and it was just like people were just, I think, happy that it wasn't actively thunderstorming. So they'd kind of ask, oh, how is it for you? Oh, we set up our tents just in time. And I think that it was finally we got to go downhill, and I think that it was kind of near Elbow Lake where it sort of leveled out and started going downhill, and maybe that's why I remember it to be so fond and like beautiful of a memory. But as we were heading downhill later on, I was looking at this really beautiful waterfall, and I was like, ooh, I'm going to take a picture of that because it's just so pretty. And it was kind of funny because if I hadn't been taking a picture, I really wouldn't have been paying that close of attention to the waterfall, and I wouldn't have noticed there was this huge moose that was just kind of hanging out. So it kind of just added more fun to that whole section.
And it was on a steep hillside too, so it was far above us in a grassy area, just hanging out. But then as soon as it saw us, it left rather quickly. But yeah, we topped out at 11,000 feet, and then we started to drop, and we were thinking about where we wanted to pitch our tent because it was getting closer to, only maybe an hour of daylight or so left in the day. And there was a lake called Upper Jean Lake, and we were thinking that's where we'd like to camp. And then when we got there, pretty much any viable camping area was taken by other people. So we continued.
Which is not even that many viable camping areas. I think we were just really trying to look for something that was protected as well. And that was pretty unprotected campsites.
And so we continued down, and basically there were like, as we were kind of traveling along this creek, there wasn't really any good options for pitching a tent. Just the ground was not providing any area. So we made it to an area called Lower Jean Lake, and there was this hillside with some trees in it, and we wanted to be kind of close to some trees to try to break up the wind, depending on what the weather was going to hold for us. So we spent some time searching, and we found some decent spots to pitch a tent, like less than perfect as far as like being flat, but like good for shelter. And better than anything we had passed in the last couple of miles. And we were ready, I think, to call it good for the day versus just continuing on without knowing what exact options there would be for camping further down.
One thing that really amazed us about Lower Jean Lake is that we were the only people there as far as we could tell. It was so beautiful. Again, kind of reminding us of the enchantments in Washington, or reminding us of Tuck and Robin Lakes in Washington. But it was just us. And of course, that does relate to, location. It's not near Seattle. It's not near, Portland. It's not near any of these big cities. And it's also out like multiple hours drive away from any larger city in Wyoming as well. And I think that we just felt so grateful to be there because it was just like this beautiful, really quiet location. And we had it all to ourselves. And that's, I just feel, very unique to people who kind of begin our hiking career in the Oregon and Washington area. So for that day, we had about 13 miles of distance that we covered, maybe a little bit more, and 3,600 feet of elevation gain, which is kind of nice to look at because I think that day I just couldn't understand why it felt so hard. And, I think we at least always have that little doubt in the back of our mind of, oh, is it just because we're not fit enough this time, blah, blah, blah. But really, 3,600 feet of elevation gain is pretty respectable on a 14.5-mile day at elevation. And I think we started at 10:30 and we finished our day around 7. So we only hiked for about 9 hours or so. And then there was also those times where we were just sitting hiding from storms. So it ended up being a really beautiful, unique day. And it had been fun to kind of make connections with some of the CDT hikers and other people we'd met along the way. Thank you so much for listening to yet another episode of the
Two Sisters on Adventures podcast.
If you want to see any pictures or videos of the places that we talked about today, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Two Sisters on Adventures. And as always, please feel free to give our podcast a rating or review. Thanks so much for listening, guys.
Bye.